The glass blooms at 7:02 a.m., a green halo swelling into a single flawless return 132 miles north of Oahu. This sweep hums, the line swings, and the echo is still there, fat and steady, not a ghost. Private George E. Elliott Jr., a trainee, leans in toward the cathode ray tube, eyes trying to read the math in that light. Training says shut down at 0700. Instinct says stay. He clears his throat, steady despite the cold, and marks the range again. The blip doesn't fade, it thickens. No aircraft he's seen on this set looks like a flock. This does. In the cramped truck at Opana Point, coffee goes cold, paper curls at the edges, and a second hand jackhammers toward the minute. Precision in green phosphor. Beyond the van, breakers hiss against rock, and Oahu keeps its Sabbath pace. Elliott nudges for a report. Procedure says, wait for the truck, wait for the day crew, wait for the center to open proper. He reaches anyway. The field telephone buzzes in his palm, a stubborn bee, and somewhere down the island a switchboard clicks the call toward Fort Shafter's Intercept Center. Sunday means half-staffed, a single officer minding a quiet room. The voice that answers is calm, almost bored. The explanation is ready before the question, probably B-17s from the mainland. Expectation is doctrine. Doctrine sounds certain. In the van, certainty is a green circle growing larger with every sweep. Elliott glances at the log, at the clock, at the door that hasn't opened since 0700, then back to the screen where the formation does not care what anyone expected. Improvisation equals disobedience only if you're wrong. He risks it. Range drops fast. The island is church bell quiet, and the echo keeps eating miles like a tide coming in. Elliott calls the number, steady as a metronome, the tone of someone who knows what he sees and can't make others see it. In town, bacon snaps on grills. On base, fighters sit neat and Sunday clean. Precision holds inside. Routine poses as readiness. The line to Fort Shafter goes still, probably hangs in the air like a lid. When certainty walks in, warning walks out. The sweep returns. The bloom fattens. The distance contracts. Seconds vanish. Elliott wipes a fingertip across the glass and marks again, because that is what he can do. He waits for the island to wake. That is the promise and the risk of the story, to test what a single overlooked warning could actually change. Could it have stopped the attack outright? Unlikely, and we will say why. Could it have blunted the first wave, saved air crews on the ground, disrupted bombing runs, and bought minutes that matter? That is the question we will answer with clocks, maps, and conservative numbers rather than hindsight. We will rebuild the morning minute by minute, then run a disciplined counterfactual built on the performance of the SCR-270, the speed of the inbound strike, the scramble timelines of P-40s and P-36s, and the staffing and communications actually in place. Two timelines will run side by side. What happened and what could happen if that call triggers an alert. The core tension threads through every frame. Precision versus chaos and doctrine versus improvisation. The radar return is clean. The system it feeds is noisy, half awake, shaped by an expectation of sabotage on the ground rather than massed aircraft in the air. A trainee leans into his reading. An officer trusts the schedule. Here is the twist. The physics give you time. The bureaucracy takes it back. The physics are simple enough to state. Detection arrives at roughly 132 miles north around 7:02. First explosions strike minutes before 8. At roughly 2 to 3 miles a minute, the inbound formation eats distance while the island burns time. Fighters, if roused and fueled, can scramble in about 10 to 15 minutes under pressure. Guns can be manned faster if ammunition is unlocked and crews are present. We will use ranges, speeds, and procedures drawn from period manuals and unit records, and we will label where testimony diverges. This is not a hunt for a scapegoat. It is a test of a system that heard a weak signal and chose the safer explanation, probably B-17s. Myth says there was no warning. Reality says there was a warning that did not become an alert. Our task is to measure the gap between seeing and acting. Why it matters lives beyond 1941. Institutions today sit inside similar fog, from air defense networks to cyber watch floors and maritime surveillance screens. Under ambiguity, leaders choose between moving early on incomplete information or waiting for confirmation that arrives too late. The cost of action is embarrassment or false alarm. The cost of inaction is measured in minutes that suddenly become lives. So we set a clear standard. We will not declare that one phone call stops a fleet. We will test whether that call, moved with urgency through a sleepy chain, could have dispersed part aircraft, launched even a small combat air patrol, stiffened anti-aircraft cruise and forced attackers to fight for surprise rather than receive it. The measure is not perfection, but friction. Hawaii had radar. It did not yet have an air defense system. At dawn on 7 December 1941, the Army's Hawaiian Air Warning Service positioned 6 SCR-270 sets around Oahu's rim, each tied to telephone to a central room at Fort Shafter called the Information, later Intercept Center. The design was elegant: detect, plot, alert. The build-out was incomplete, and Sunday routines thinned it further. Schedules set the pulse. Operators trained from 0400 to 0700, when range improved and practice was easy. After 0700, sets were supposed to shut down, vans to be packed, and the day to begin. The Intercept Center, not yet truly operational on Sundays, expected to switch fully on after 0800. That meant early calls often passed a general switchboard to a sparse watch who took messages more than action. Doctrine lived on a clock. Improvisation had few channels. The SCR-270 at Opana and its sister sets could see far. Against a bomber formation at altitude, they returned firm echoes beyond 100 miles. They gave bearing and range, not height, and they offered no way to sort friend from foe. Bearings were coarse enough to make the plotting table an art, not only a science. The hardware was ahead of the human system meant to use it. Commanders had read war warning messages that left room for interpretation. They had also been told that sabotage was the likelier first blow. The Army Air Forces parked fighters wingtip to ease guarding. Ammunition stayed locked except for drills. Guards thickened around hangars, while the new threat of radar remained an accessory. Myth sketched a blind island. Reality showed a young eye no one trusted yet. Another expectation shaped that morning. A flight of B-17s ferried from Hamilton Field was due near dawn, unarmed and low on fuel. Their arrival window overlapped any long-range return from the north, with no integrated identification, friend or foe, and no habit of checking call signs against plots. A large echo could be recast as friendly. Probably B-17s sounded prudent because it matched the plan. Navy ships lay mostly at Pearl Harbor under Condition 3, not at battle stations. Many crews were ashore for Sunday. On Army fields, anti-aircraft batteries had men nearby, but not necessarily at posts with ammunition ready. Pursuit squadrons built up readiness by the workday, not by a standing alert. Doctrine favored order and guarding against the saboteur you could see. North of the island, Kido Butai closed in under radio silence. The first wave launched beyond the horizon, climbed and drove inbound on a track that would cross the SCR-270 arcs head-on. Mountains on Oahu made low-altitude shadows, but high-flying bombers were ideal radar targets. In geometry, the island had time. In practice, time bled through seams. Inside Fort Shafter, the plotting table existed. The culture around it lagged. Controllers and filter officers were still learning their roles. The process to turn a phone call into a scramble order was informal and fragile. On Sundays, the room was sparsely manned, with an officer present whose expertise lay in flying, not running a node in an integrated warning net. He could not conjure capacity. He could only interpret a report. This was the gap between doctrine and improvisation. Doctrine told radar vans when to start and when to stop, told centers when to open and who to expect, told commanders which threats ranked first. Improvisation lived at the margins, when a set stayed on a little longer, when an operator made a call outside a checklist, when someone treated a weak signal as a real warning. Myth said there was no chance to react. Reality said there was a narrow chance, easily lost. Constraints multiplied. Pursuit squadrons could scramble quickly once the order came, but getting that order out fast, to the right fields, with enough context to justify dispersing aircraft and unlocking ammunition, required a confidence the system did not yet possess. Tools were present, habits were not. All of this made the island's shield functional in parts and porous in the whole. Radar could reach, but its reach often ended at a switchboard. The Japanese approach put the physics on the island side. The bureaucracy took minutes back. At Opana Point, 2 operators watched their set draw a clean line to the north. One stayed on the set and picked up the phone. That act pressed precision against routine, quietly testing whether anyone beyond his van would move in time. He is the voice on a phone line almost no one remembers. Private George E. Elliott Jr. stands in a cramped radar van at Opana Point, young, polite, and stubborn in the precise way of someone who believes numbers over moods. Beside him, Joseph L. Lockard rides the sweep of the SCR-270 like a musician, coaxing stability out of a finicky set. 2 men, 1 scope, a generator generator humming too loud, and a Sunday script already written. Training hours shut down at 700. Hand the morning back to routine. In accounts and headlines, Lockard became the name. He was the experienced hand, credited with holding the set on and tracking the return. Elliot, a trainee, slipped into the footnotes as the helper. Yet the hinge in this story is not the hand on the dial, but the voice on the wire. Reports describe Elliot as the one who urged the call, who reached for the field telephone when procedure said wait. Inside the van, precision battles small chaos. Paper curls at the edges, pencils roll, and the log waits for ranges and bearings written clean. The antenna works its arc, the green bloom thickens, and the room shrinks to the scope and the clock. Elliot is not a grandstander. He is deliberate, careful in his phrasing, aware that rank sits elsewhere and that he is only a private. The power of numbers gives him courage. The return is too big, too steady, too far out to be local training traffic. It looks like a formation, not a glitch. The question that trails him through history is deceptively simple. Who made the call? Some testimony places Lockard on the line. Other recollections, including Elliot's, place the handset in Elliot's palm. If certainty is impossible, the convergence is useful. Both agree a report traveled to Fort Shafter around 0720, routed through a thin Sunday watch to one officer in a quiet room. And both agree on the content, a large target to the north, coming in fast. At the other end of that line sat First Lieutenant Kermit A. Tyler, a pursuit pilot learning the job of controller. He faced doctrine constrained by habit. The island expected sabotage more than air attack. A flight of B-17s was due from the mainland. The room around him was scarcely staffed and not yet loaded with authority. Tyler listened, weighed the pieces against his map of the morning, and leaned toward the friendly explanation. He was not a villain, he was a product of the schedule. Here is the quiet twist. The name attached to the warning in many retellings is not Elliot's, yet the human hinge belongs to him. Being a trainee made his choice heavier. He was nudging past procedure, past the safe anonymity of shutting down at 0700, toward a report no one had asked for. Myth prefers a lone seer with a clear line to power. Reality gives us a private taking a breath and saying, in effect, this looks wrong. That tension, precision versus chaos, doctrine versus improvisation, lives in the van. Lockard tunes the set until the bloom holds. Elliot writes clean figures and reaches for the phone. Between them, a chain of command that is both everywhere and nowhere stretches across Oahu, built to receive reports on weekdays and to keep its manners on Sundays. Elliot does not accuse or dramatize. Accounts suggest he is insistent but respectful, repeating range and bearing. He is not trying to be right, he is trying to be heard. In later boards and interviews, the phrasing differs. He moves to test the system's reach. The truck doesn't come. Training hours end at 0700, but the road below Opana Point is empty, and the generator still rattles the van. Joseph L. Lockard keeps the set alive out of habit and hunger. The sweep feels like a pulse he doesn't want to lose. He rides the gain, nudging the dial until the green trace is clean. Beside him, Private George E. Elliott Jr. sharpens a pencil and opens the logbook to a fresh line. Sunday is supposed to be simple. Shut down, wait for a ride, hand the island back to quiet routines. The antenna turns, the sea breathes, the glass starts to whisper a different plan. The scope blooms. A return steadies on the north edge of the range rings, fat and cohesive, not spiky like clutter. Elliot leans in, counts the miles off the graticule, about 132. Lockard watches the sweep roll through again. The echo is still there, now a little stronger. Elliot writes the range, bearing, time, the small block letters of someone who knows the record matters. Training traffic doesn't look like this. It's too large, too smooth, too steady, like a whole page of aircraft pressed into one mark. Precision fills the phosphor. Chaos lives outside. A missing truck, a half-awake chain, a room at Fort Shafter that isn't fully open yet. Procedure says power down at 0700, leave the rest to the watch that starts at 8. Elliot feels the rule brush his shoulder and lets it pass. We should report, he says, or words close to it. Lockard nods without taking his eyes off the tube. Elliot lifts the field telephone, cranks, waits for a click. Somewhere down the island, a switchboard connects copper to copper. Accounts place the call around 0720, a line walking from a van on a bluff to an information center that is more promise than practice this early. No identification system ties plots to friendly flights. Expectation has to fill the gaps. Fort Shafter is quiet. The plotting table stands ready with grease pencils and string, but the room is sparsely manned. First Lieutenant Kermit A. Tyler, a pursuit pilot learning the job of controller, minds the phones. He knows a flight of B-17s is due from the mainland around dawn. He knows Sunday staffing thins the island's reflexes. He does not know a Japanese carrier force sits beyond the horizon. The phone rings. Tyler answers into a space built for hours that haven't started yet. The report is simple. Large target, north, closing fast. Elliot relays range and bearing, steady and respectful, the cadence of a man letting numbers carry the weight. Accounts differ on exact phrasing, but the gist of the reply holds. Probably the B-17s. Don't worry about it. Tyler interprets the unknown through doctrine. Radar has yet never delivered an enemy over Oahu. The safest explanation fits the schedule on his desk. He is not careless. He is consistent with the plan. In the van, the echo swells. In the center, the plot that could have been is never marked. Then, suddenly, the echo thickens, range falling by miles every sweep. Elliot repeats the numbers into a line that has already gone still. The physics give time. The bureaucracy takes it back. Lockhart holds the set steady, each pass a drumbeat. Elliot logs every change because logging is what he can control. Outside, Oahu keeps its Sunday rhythm. On base, fighters sit wingtip to wingtip. Guards scan for saboteurs. Ammunition stands locked. Precision is here, in glass and ink. Chaos is there, in partial facts and polite certainty. The window from first detection to first explosions narrows. Elliot sets the handset down and looks again at the bloom that does not care what anyone expects. He considers calling again, considers asking for a scramble by name, but the habits in his bones pull against that leap. The handset is heavy with rank he does not have. Somewhere church bells ring. Somewhere else engines sleep on ships that will not move. The echo answers none of it, only closes. Minutes feel loud inside the van. Now the only question is whether anyone moves before the echo becomes sound. The line out of Opana runs hot, then goes cold. In the van, a crisp echo fattens on the screen. On the island, the call slides through copper and habit. It reaches Fort Shafter not as an alarm, but as a curiosity. The intercept center breathes a Sunday quiet. The plotting table stands ready like a stage with no actors. A trainee's report arrives at the wrong hour for the right message. The echo holds. The phone, after a short exchange, does not. What leaves Opana as precision enters Fort Shafter as ambiguity, and ambiguity drains urgency from the room. Chain of custody matters. Opana's SCR-270 set produces bearing and range. Joseph Lockhart stabilizes the gain. George Elliott logs the figures and reaches for the handset. The call routes first to a post switchboard, a routine gate built for orderly days. From there, it should feed a staffed intercept center, where plotters mark the board and a controller weighs action. On this Sunday, the route shortens and thins. The switchboard connects to a sparsely manned room. A single junior officer, First Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, is present to observe and learn not to run a network. The design requires steps. The reality offers only one. In theory, this room operates as a filter. Reports arrive from 6 radar sites. Enlisted plotters pin bearings, draw threads on the map, and a controller combines lines, speed, and time into warnings. Phones tie the center to Wheeler and Hickam fields, to pursuit squadrons, to anti-aircraft batteries, and to Navy contacts. In practice, on 7 December before 8 o'clock, the intercept center is not fully open. Testimony describes minimal staff, a switchboard operator, perhaps a plotter, and Tyler seated without the authority or procedure to launch fighters. The board is empty because the system treats it as optional until the day properly starts. Affidavits taken after the attack allow a cautious reconstruction. Lockhart reported seeing a large echo at about 0702. He and Elliott tracked it steadily. Around 0720, they placed a call to Fort Shafter. The enlisted man who answered routed them to Tyler. Elliott, by his account, relayed range and bearing and noted the size of the return. Tyler, by his, recognized the report but believed it matched the expected B-17 ferries. The oft-quoted language, "don't worry about it," appears in some retellings. Formal testimony leans toward a calm assessment that the contact was probably friendly. Either way, the effect was the same. No plot, no alert. Here the procedural gaps multiply.
apply. A controller receiving a report can challenge for essential detail,
Confirm the bearing, request repeated ranges to estimate speed, ask for altitude if available, and direct sustained tracking. The SCR-270 could not read height, but rate of change was visible across sweeps. No such interrogatory appears in the record. There was no immediate cross-check to Wheeler or Hickam, no call to a duty officer to verify the B-17 arrival window, no controller neat rows. The intercept center remained a telephone, not a nerve center. Blame, in the days that followed, settled on Tyler. Myth compresses him into a single careless sentence and makes him the stop where the warning died. Reality sketches a more disquieting picture. Tyler was placed at a console without formal controller training on a Sunday morning before full staffing, in a setup that had no clear doctrine for converting a radar blip into authority. He did what peacetime habit encouraged. He discounted an anomaly to fit a schedule. The system gave him no checklists for uncertainty and no immediate paths to action. A single name is easier to indict than a design. Across the island, the rest of peacetime was equally orderly. Ammunition remained under lock. Guards watched for cutters and saboteurs. Fighters sat wingtip to wingtip to simplify security. Routine looked like readiness until the sky demanded movement. The contrast would sharpen within the hour at Halewa, where two pilots would break from the script, dash for their P-40s, and take off under attack. Their improvisation stands as a rebuke and a lesson. It also underlines the point. When a system does not move signals into orders, individuals either accept doctrine or bend it. At Fort Shafter that morning, doctrine held. Time on paper shows how close the window truly was. Opana's set caught the formation at roughly 0702 at about 132 miles. The Echo marched inward at a rate consistent with high-performance aircraft, several miles per minute. Lockard and Elliott, by multiple statements, tracked the return until about 0739, when the image fell off the scope near the island's northern land shadow, or as they powered down. The call to Fort Shafter sits near the middle of that span, around 0720. That leaves roughly 35 minutes between detection and first bombs, and roughly 30 after the report. Enough to do something, not enough to do everything. Here is the cruel arithmetic, the small print that decides whether a signal lives. The Intercept Center does not command airfields. It exists to filter, warn, and advise. Scramble Authority sits with pursuit commanders at Wheeler and Halewa, or with higher headquarters. On a weekday, that distinction is a formality. Phones ring, officers are at desks, orders flow. On this Sunday, the distinction is fatal. A warning that lands in a room without the power to act must convince others to move. Tyler would have needed both confidence in the plot and access to leaders. He had neither in that hour. Consider the human moment. Tyler is a pilot by trade, not yet a trained controller. He sits in a quiet room hearing a report that, on its face, resembles the friendlies he expects. There is no roar outside, no second confirming call from another radar site, no commander standing at his shoulder. If he sounds calm, it is because the system around him is calm. If he defaults to the B-17 explanation, it is because doctrine has primed him to guard against local sabotage while thanking the sky for silence. He makes a conservative call, and conservatism in that instant is risk. What might a challenge have yielded? Had Tyler or any enlisted plotter asked for repeated range calls at 1-minute intervals, Elliott and Lockard could have provided a rate of closure consistent with fast, high-number contacts. A call to Hickam's operations desk might have confirmed the B-17s were due, but scattered, flying singly, not in a mass large enough to paint as one. A quick reach to Wheeler could have set a standby, if not a full scramble. None of this guarantees success. It does change posture. You disperse aircraft, unlock guns, man posts, and you meet the first wave awake, not asleep. The paperwork trail mirrors the thinness of the response. The Opana log shows times and ranges, meet blocks of ink. Fort Shafter's board produces no corresponding grease pencil track. There is no flash message punched out to fields, no tally of acknowledgments, no notation of a stand to. These are not the signs of lazy men. They are the seams of a build that had not yet been finished. Sunday routines were honest and destructive. The island could see farther than it could reach. A radar without a receiver is a noise. A radar without trust is a light in an empty room. Even the clock, instrument of precision, becomes slippery in the retellings. Elliott and Lockard's statements provide slightly different hands on the dial. One places the first notable contact just after 0700. Another memory has the call placed closer to 0715. Tyler recalled receiving a report
but could not, later, fix the minute with certainty. Post-attack boards tried to align logs with testimony and arrived at an approximate sequence. Detection at 0702, call about 0720, tracking until around 0739. Discrepancies are not evidence of dishonesty so much as the predictable drift of human recall under stress. Watches are unsynchronized. Operators look between screen and log, and no one believes a phone call will become history until it does. The window does not disappear with these variations. Whether the call rang at 0715 or 0722, there remained a significant interval in which action could have begun had the chain been primed to trust a trainee's numbers over a Sunday plan. Context from elsewhere clarifies what was missing. Where radar matured into a system, a filter room carried explicit authority, standardized queries, and drilled connections to fighter command. Reports did not stop at interpretation. They triggered checklists that moved people. OHA's network was still learning those muscles. The SCR-270 could see far, but no common doctrine told a Sunday watch how to translate a large fast return into immediate dispersion and readiness. Phones existed, but the trust to use them aggressively did not. That gap is why signals die. The operators did their part, the chain did not. What follows tests what living that signal might have changed. The clock has not finished yet.
40 minutes is a lifetime if someone moves, and a blink if no one does. The radar sees the formation at roughly 132 miles around 7:02. First bombs hit at 7:55. That is not fiction's window. That is the island's math. The question is what a sober, conservative response could plant into those minutes. Nothing magical, just decisions grounded in what the hardware and people could do under pressure on a Sunday. Run two lines side by side. On the historical line, the call from Opana does not trigger an immediate alert. Routine holds. On the alternative line, that same call jumps the queue. The center challenges for repeated ranges, treats the rate of closure as hostile until proved otherwise, and dials forward. The numbers do not change, but the island's posture does. First, air. The fastest practical effect is a small combat air patrol from Wheeler or the satellite strip at Haleiwa. Conservative figures from the period put pressured scramble at roughly 10 to 15 minutes once pilots and crew are in motion. A P-40 can be warmed, taxied, and airborne within that span if fuel is in the tanks and ammunition can be loaded quickly, or, at minimum, belts brought to the aircraft for rapid feed on landing. Picture a clock that starts at 7:20 when the call is taken seriously. Phones to Wheeler and Haleiwa ring by 7:22. Duty officers shake pilots from barracks or homes. A jeep tears across the field. Engines start by 7:30. By 7:35 to 7:40, 2 to 6 fighters could be wheels up, climbing over the North Shore or cutting south toward Pearl's approaches. Geometry helps them. At 2 to 3 miles a minute, inbound formations cross the northern tip near Kakuku and fan west and south. A P-40 at climb speed closes that gap, especially if vectored early toward a cone rather than a point. Altitude is the constraint. Dive bombers and escorting fighters come in lower. Level bombers ride higher. A 10-minute climb gives 8 to 12,000 feet, enough to meet the lower elements and threaten the rest. Even with that, the goal is not to stop the raid. The realistic aim is to break its opening shape. A pair of fighters slashing into the lead echelons forces escorts to engage early, drags the timing, and frays the carefully set intervals between groups. Attackers jettison tanks or bombs to maneuver. Bomb runs shift from textbook to hurried. Losses rise at the margins. 1 or 2 aircraft here, a missed target there, but the larger effect is time bled from a schedule that depends on surprise. Second, the ground. Dispersal orders, pushed quickly, move aircraft off neat, straightable rows. Revetments were limited, but open space existed. Rolling a squadron into staggered spacing, pointing noses outward, and separating fuel trucks from lines does not require a full plan. It requires permission and keys. At the same time, select anti-aircraft batteries can be manned. 3-inch guns at forts ringing the harbor, 37mm and .50 caliber positions at airfields, searchlights and rangefinders readied even in daylight to coordinate fire. This is where human friction fights the clock. Armories are locked, keys live with duty officers who may not be on site, ammunition must be issued, fuses set, belts carried by hand or truck to hard stands. Many crews are off post for Sunday. Recall takes minutes, yet an alert
alert at 7:22 buys 20 to 30 minutes to start those processes. If gunners reach mounts before the first passes, the opening massed strafing runs at Wheeler and Hickam meet something more than empty air. Third, the harbor. The fleet sits at Condition 3, a modest air defense shift, ready-use ammo at mounts, directors powered, extra lookouts scanning high, can be done fast. Full Condition 1 before 7:55 is unrealistic. Quick steps are not. Several ships fired within minutes once the attack began. Move that start line earlier and the first torpedo bombers meet hotter water. Model it conservatively. At roughly 2.5 miles a minute, 132 miles gives close to 50 minutes. Subtract phone routing and hesitation and a half hour remains. Scramble by 7:35, climb 10 minutes, and fighters are over the North Shore or Central Plateau by 7:45, between inbound streams and their objectives for the last 10 minutes. What do they see? The first wave is not a monolith. Elements of fighters and dive bombers sweep and later revisit the airfields. Torpedo crews and level bombers drive for the harbor. A North Shore cap likely meets the outer zero screen and trailing vols first. Any engagement there, even brief, bleeds escort attention and fuel and forces some formations to tighten, break, or reclock. A surviving cap can then drag the fight toward Pearl's approaches, scattering dives and delaying torpedo runs by minutes that multiply down the chain. They are not invincible. They are busy, and busyness burns time and fuel. Reality pushes back. Many fighters sat with empty guns, covers on, and few ground crew immediately at hand. Fuel trucks might be parked neatly in the very lanes strafers would target. The fastest response would come from where improvisation was already muscle memory. Haliewa, with fewer forms and less ceremony, could launch a pair before Wheeler could turn a squadron. That is not a criticism. It is an acknowledgement that in chaos, the short chain outruns the perfect one. What does mitigation look like in practice? Fewer fighters destroyed on the ground because they are not sitting wingtip to wingtip when the first zero strafe. More gunners firing sooner, creating a sky with more tracers and more decisions for pilots whose training prized calm accuracy. A handful of attacking aircraft lost before they release. A few bombs dropped wide. A couple of torpedoes launched from poor lanes. Damage still severe. Ships still struck. But the first wave leaves with more gaps, and the second arrives to a defense already awake. Myth loves absolutes. One call saves a fleet. One shrug dooms an island. Reality is harder and more useful. The radar return offered precision. The system receiving it was chaos, shaped into routine. Within that gap, practical choices existed. None of them suspend disbelief. They simply stack small advantages, launch a pair, disperse the line, stage ammunition that turn pure surprise into contested arrival. In air defense, minutes are currency. Spent early, they buy options. Saved for certainty, they buy nothing. Consider the siren's path. An early air raid warning sent through police and base networks clears runways of casual traffic, moves ambulances to staging points, and closes hangar doors. None of that stops a bomber. All of it reduces secondary loss. Even the simple act of ordering aircraft refuelers to disperse or to park behind berms changes what burns first. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the unspectacular mechanics that blunt an edge sharpened by secrecy. At sea level, details matter. Ready-use lockers opened early mean hoists run sooner and crews settle into rhythm before the first bomb splashes. Directors aligned and power on reduces the dead seconds that plagued initial salvos. The difference is not cinematic, it is cumulative. A few more torpedo planes lost in the approach. More shrapnel deflected by men already under steel helmets. Fires fought minutes earlier. In naval actions, those minutes do not rewrite history, but they redraw the edges. There is a final test, the one the attackers themselves would have applied. They counted on a silent island and an empty sky. Replace silence with a siren and emptiness with even a thin cap, and cockpit math changes. Escorts peel. Leaders rethink routes. The first run is no longer a measured approach, but a problem to solve in real time. That is the story carried in from the north, how an early echo turned into movement could have forced them to fight for their surprise. The echo keeps closing. The phone line stays quiet, and north of Oahu, the first wave settles into attack speed. In the lead cockpit, throttles ease forward. Mixture-rich prop discs bright in the dawn. Radio silence holds. Signals move by hand, by wing waggle, by one flare if needed. Doctrine expects surprise. Rendezvous by time and bearing, then descend in assigned lanes toward designated targets. Doctrine also concedes a chance of being seen. If interceptors rise, fighters peel. If guns open early, timing flexes. The leaders scan for contrails or specks clawing up. The sky stays empty. Streams diverge. Torpedo crews run low over the water, rehearsed for months to launch shallow and fast. Higher, level bombers hold around 10,000 feet. Above them, dive bombers loiter, ready to fold and drop. A zero screen steps outward, loose but present. The North Shore slides under wings. Cane fields, reef lines, a narrow road with almost no traffic. No rising cap, no muzzle flashes to spoil the geometry. Ingress reports later captured a note of astonishment. They had planned to fight through some resistance. Instead, the approaches were clean. Surprise felt earned, but it also felt observed. No contrails, no scramble. A lead crewman ticks time on his kneeboard, then passes the signal to commence. Some memoirs describe a coded call asserting surprise. Scholars have cautioned against relying on any single voice. Either way, the visual truth matched the plan. The defenders were not yet airborne. Then a different silhouette noses in from the east, American, tired, and exactly the shape that turned an urgent report into a reassurance. A flight of B-17s has come overnight from the mainland, heavy with fuel and light on everything else. Guns are mounted, but ammunition is not aboard. Peacetime ferry rules assumed a quiet arrival. Navigators work dead reckoning and radio beacons. Fuel gauges sink. Hickam is the plan. Oahu rises and with it smoke. Black pillars where hangars should be. White geysers stitching the harbor. In one cockpit, the pilot shoves throttles, trying to climb above the mess, and sees fighters flashing in with red circles on their wings. Radio spit partial phrases. No one knows which frequencies are safe. Improvisation replaces doctrine. Crews veer for bellows or line up for Hickam through dust and weaving between fires and debris. On short final, one airplane dumps weight, fuel, gear, even survival kits to make the strip. Another lands long to miss a burning hulk and rolls into grass. From Japanese cockpits, that arrival reads as confirmation. Friendly heavies appearing unaware, defenders stunned, and airfields unready. The plan tightens, confidence hardens, and timing holds. Only later, over Wheeler and the harbor, will the order begin to fray. Here the contrast is sharp. Kido Butai's doctrine is meticulous. Altitude blocks, ingress headings, split targets, radio silence until the moment. Crews fly it as written, adjusting only for wind and cloud. The B-17 pilots abandon plan on contact. Formation gives way to survival instinct and airmanship. They use hand signals, S-turns, and judgment to avoid mid-air collisions over burning fields. One crew lands gear up to keep sparks away from fuel. Another side slips to lose speed when flaps fail. Doctrine achieves surprise. Improvisation salvages lives. After-action reflections from Japanese participants noted the absence of interceptors on ingress and the short delay before organized anti-aircraft fire. Some credited surprise. Others pointed to aircraft concentrated on the ground. Caution belongs here. The most famous narratives, including those attributed to the strike leader, are contested in places. Cross-checking diaries, carrier logs, and American unit histories produces a consistent shape. Detection likely occurred, but it was not translated into an alert that forced an early fight. Myth calls it total surprise. Reality looks more like a warning that never found authority. For the inbound B-17 crews, the irony is personal. The very expectation that muted the radar report now meets them in the worst way. They arrive as proof of the assumption, yet without guns or gas to help anyone. They do not know about the phone call. They know only smoke, fuel needles near empty, and the feel of landing gear thumping onto a strip that was supposed to be calm. 2 vantage points, 1 lesson. The attackers believe surprise is intact because the sky looks empty. The friendlies discover war by seeing it, not being warned of it. That gap between seeing and acting lives in the surviving paperwork and testimony. The pages contest memory against math and show what, in those minutes, could have moved. The receipts exist. Our attention rests on paper, sworn statements, documents, logs, manuals, war diaries that put numbers beside memory. Citations will appear as we go, so every minute we claim traces back to a page. We anchor the timeline in 3 official inquiries: the Roberts Commission, 1942, the Army Pearl Harbor Board, 1944, and the Congressional Joint Committee, 1945-46. They preserve timestamps and statements from Joseph Lockard, George E. Elliott Jr., and First Lieutenant Kermit A. Tyler. They disagree on details, but frame the window: contact after 0700 hours, a report near 0720 hours, tracking into the high 0730 hours. The Roberts report records Tyler's measured recollection that the plot was probably B-17s. The Army and Congressional boards add Elliott's and Lockard's versions, both insisting on a large, fast target from the north. The famous line, "Don't worry about it," appears in later retellings. Where the formal record is more cautious, we will mark the difference and show both, because the practical outcome, no alert, matches across sources. For the operator's side, we rely on Opana logs and sworn statements to outline the sequence: discovery at roughly 132 miles, repeated ranges called and written, last returns near Island Shadow. We will annotate timestamps with a margin because watches were not synchronized and some statements were recorded months later. Precision here means intervals, not a single perfect minute. Technical claims draw from U.S. Army Signal Corps manuals and field notes for the SCR-270. We will cite conservative capability figures: detection against high-flying formations beyond 100 miles, bearing accuracy sufficient for a plot, and no altitude readout. Equally vital is what the set could not do in 1941. It had no integrated identification friend or foe, and its performance depended on trained hands and reliable telephone links. To ground scrambled timelines, we will reference the Army Air Forces in World War II, edited by Craven and Kate, complemented by unit histories and field diaries. These sources give us typical ready times for P-40s and P-36s under pressure, and they describe weekend staffing realities. Where veterans recall sprints that beat the book, we will flag them as exceptional, not assumed. The B-17 ferry flight appears in AAF planning documents and squadron records from Hamilton Field. We will annotate expected arrival windows and the lack of onboard ammunition for aircraft in transit, which explains why a radar plot could credibly be read as friendly. That annotation will sit next to the radar track, so viewers can see how doctrine met hard return and chose the safer story. For the Japanese perspectives, we will present claims with caution. The best-known first-person account by Mitsuo Fuchida has influenced decades of narrative, yet several assertions in his later writings are disputed by operational records and modern scholarship. We will cross-check his descriptions against Carrier Air Group logs, Japanese official histories, and analyses by researchers who have compared launch times, headings, and radio procedures. Where the sources conflict, we show the spread rather than force a single line. American naval readiness references come from ship deck logs and after-action reports, which record condition settings, first shots, and ammunition issues. We will use them to calibrate what a realistic shift from Condition 3 toward heightened watch might have achieved in minutes, not hours. Again, the claim is mitigation, not miracle. Visual discipline protects credibility. We will use period maps of Oahu, scanned from contemporary defense studies, to plot radar arcs and approach routes, and we will keep overlays modest: bearing lines, range rings, closure rates, with footnoted speeds. Photographs of the Opana site and the SCR-270 vans will be sourced from identifiable Signal Corps collections. Wherever a reenactment fills a gap, we will label it as reconstruction, not evidence. Accuracy notes will travel with the story. When we say Elliott urged the call, and when we describe who held the handset, we will cite the passages that support each version and mark them as contested. When we show the 132-mile return, we will include the bearing reported and the lack of altitude data. When we model scramble times, we will display the range, from idealized drills to documented Sunday responses, and err on the slower side. The governing contrast stays explicit. Precision sits in the citations, the logs, the plotted bearings, the conservative speeds. Chaos lives in mismatched clocks, Sunday staffing, and the human pull toward the comforting explanation. Myth simplifies to a hero or a scapegoat. Reality spreads responsibility across procedures, doctrine, and habit, and the documents make that visible. We cite not to win an argument, but to earn trust. With the record pinned pinned down and its gaps honestly marked, the story can carry weight. It also sets up the next movement, what the institutions did with these findings, and how a half-built warning net learned, painfully, to become a system.
The shooting stopped. The hunt for fault began. By afternoon, investigators were taking notes, and by week's end, the word warning had become an accusation that needed a name. The path of least resistance led to the quiet room at Fort Shafter. Newspapers fixed on a single officer and a single phrase. Kermit Tyler carried that burden for decades. The first inquiry preserved his calm assessment that the blip was probably B-17s. Retellings hardened it into "don't worry about it." He was a pursuit pilot temporarily assigned to an undermanned center, not a trained controller. Later boards widened the frame, pointing to peacetime schedules, incomplete doctrine, and a call that reached a room without the power or procedure to act. Tyler served through the war, retired quietly, and saw his name return in anniversaries that needed a foil. In interviews late in life, he repeated the logic of the morning and the limits of his role. The lesson is not absolution, it is proportion. Recognition for the men on the Hill was uneven. Joseph Lockard's name often led articles and captions. George E. Eliot Jr., the trainee who urged the report, appeared deeper in the column. Recommendations and commendations surfaced in files, but the highest decorations proved ill-matched to an action that preceded formal war. Their story slid into the background as unit histories focused on pilots who fought with tracers visible to cameras. Decades later, obituaries and local memorials restored some balance. The Opana site itself was preserved and marked. Visitors could stand where a green circle once swelled and read a plaque that names the operators. Even there, the "who held the phone" dispute remains a reminder that memory can sharpen or blur depending on the angle. The larger legacy played out in procedure. Hawaii turned the radar from a training aid into a 24-hour instrument. Sets stayed on not because curiosity demanded it, but because orders required it. The Intercept Center became the filter room in practice as well as name. Staffed in shifts, drilled in standardized queries, and linked by dedicated circuits to fields and batteries. Bearing, range, repeat in 1 minute, rate of closure. Any friendlies expected on that bearing? Those prompts became reflex. So did the expectation that a single anomalous plot was enough to raise posture. Authority moved too. Post-attack directives pre-delegated scramble and dispersion in ways unthinkable the week before. Duty officers at Wheeler, Halewa, and Hickam gained standing orders to launch a small cap on the strength of radar plus uncertainty. Rather than waiting for perfect confirmation, keys came out of safes, ammunition sat closer to guns, dispersal plans were written on paper and walked on concrete, so a sleepy Sunday could not keep aircraft in neat rows. The authority moved too. Post-attack directives pre-delegated scramble and dispersion in ways unthinkable the week before. Duty officers at Wheeler, Halewa, and Hickam gained standing orders to launch a small cap on the strength of radar plus uncertainty, rather than waiting for perfect confirmation. Keys came out of safes, ammunition sat closer to guns, dispersal plans were written on paper and walked on concrete, so a sleepy Sunday could not keep aircraft in neat rows. Here is the quiet surprise in the fix. It was less about buying more hardware than about buying time with trust. IFF transponders arrived in subsequent years, and they mattered. Better sets followed, but the first step was cultural. Controllers learned to challenge and escalate. Commanders learned to accept false alarms as the price of catching a real one. Exercises graded speed, not etiquette. Clock discipline. What minute was lost to a switchboard, what minute was saved by a direct line, became a metric. The Navy absorbed the same lessons at sea. Fighter direction officers on carriers matured procedures to fuse radar, lookouts, and radio discipline into vectors that launched intercepts early and often. Ashore, joint nets spread across islands and coasts, blending ground sets with human observers. In the Solomons and beyond, the defensive airfields evolved from a morning surprise into a practiced dance. Early plots, ready pilots, gunners at posts, dispersal drilled until it felt inevitable. Improvisation did not disappear. It was expected, coached, and given lanes to run. Stateside, the architecture scaled. The wartime aircraft warning service grew into a continental lattice of reporting posts, filter rooms, and fighter command centers. Post-war, the Air Defense Command and then NORAD carried the idea forward. Sensors feeding staff centers, authority pre-positioned, and eventually computers routing tracks. Sage consoles and radar picket lines were far from Opana's humming van, but the problem was the same. Turn weak signals into timely action and prevent them from dying at a desk. That continuity reframes the
scapegoat question. Individuals make choices. Systems decide outcomes. Tyler's answer was one choice in a room built to cushion choices from consequence. Elliot's insistence was another in a van designed to be ignored outside its training hours. When institutions redesigned the chain so a private's numbers could move aircraft without a court of inquiry, they changed the moral weight placed on a single voice. Doctrine against improvisation became doctrine that demands it at the edges. The green circle is crisp, but the chain that could have carried it is not. A private sees something real and tells the truth he can prove. Bearing, range, rate. The line answers with a polite story, and that story wins. One man can see clearly, but systems decide. Early warning without trusted pathways is noise. That is the sober meaning that survives the smoke and the anniversaries. Doctrine promises order. Improvisation buys time. On Oahu that morning, doctrine ran on clocks and keys. Improvisation lived in a van on a bluff. The point is not romance. Institutions must bend on purpose so the first person who sees can make others act before certainty exists. Precision and chaos share the same morning. The radar's numbers are clean. The human picture is muddy. Numbers need a narrative and authority, or they remain glowing circles in a room. This is where accountability belongs. Not in a hunt for a convenient villain, but in a culture that either translates signals into posture or lets them die at a desk. The myth says there was no warning. The record says the island heard a signal and chose not to elevate it. Pearl Harbor was not blind, it was deaf to its own signal. That deafness grew from peacetime habit, incomplete procedures, and a bias toward the most comfortable explanation. Those are fixable flaws, but only if leaders reward movement on ambiguity and tolerate alarms that turn out to be nothing. Here is the turn. The hazard was not a technical failure. It was success without belief. The set worked. The call traveled. What failed was confidence, authority, and a designed route from detection to action. When that route is missing, the system defaults to inaction because inaction feels safer. The cost is hidden until the first explosion unveils it. Accountability still matters, and it must be shaped to the problem. Hold people to standards they can see and meet. Build systems that do not force heroism to compensate for policy. Pre-delegate small scrambles and dispersals. Drill questions that challenge assumptions. Pay for a few false alarms up front to avoid a calamity that gives you perfect clarity too late. Chance threads the story. A missing truck keeps a set on. A trainee picks up a phone. A B-17 ferry schedule overlaps the moment the echo appears. None of that absolves institutions. It reminds us that design has to account for luck, good and bad, by building slack into the morning and trust into the line. When chance offers a window, habit should not slam it shut. The personal texture matters too. Elliot, Lockhart, and Tyler were not symbols when they took their places. They were men doing their jobs at the edge of incomplete doctrine. One leaned on numbers, one tuned a shaky set, one answered a quiet phone. Judging them in full means holding two truths together. Character counts, and structure sets the table on which character eats. Carry the lesson forward without theatrics. Sensors multiply. Screens fill with weak signals. The hard part is unchanged. Give the midnight watch authority to raise posture when the picture tilts, and give commanders the appetite to be embarrassed rather than surprised. Build doctrine that expects improvisation, then trains it until it looks like discipline. The echo at Opana could not stop a fleet. It could have bent a morning. That is enough meaning to matter. The strategic payoff lives in cultures that act on weak signals, in rooms where a private's numbers buy minutes that multiply downstream. Follow that line into nights where detection becomes action. The green circle fades, but the question it asks stays with us. When a weak signal appears, who moves first? From that van on Opana to fighters clawing for altitude, the arc runs from fragile detection to decisive interception. If this story landed for you, take the next step with us into the moment America learned to turn blips into vectors. Watch next, the birth of American night fighters and the early warning net at Guadalcanal. Blacked out cockpits, red-wash radar scopes, a controller whispering headings while a crew hunts a dot no eye can see. We'll trace how ground controllers, coast watchers, and rough-dug fighter direction centers fused radar, radio, and nerve into interceptions that started with a single return and ended with engines falling silent. It's the same problem, pushed into darkness, solved by by people who learn to move on ambiguity, carry the lesson forward. Where is today's Opana moment? A lone anomaly on a cyber dashboard, a glint on a space sensor, a gene sequence that doesn't fit. Who has the authority to act before certainty arrives? And how do we reward the right false alarm? Precision still needs a pathway. Doctrine still has to invite improvisation. If we build that trust, minutes become options again. Add your piece to the record. If your family kept a diary, if you served in radar, fighter control, or a shipboard CIC, tell us how your unit handled weak signals and false starts. Point us to archives, museum collections, and local histories we should read. We'll feature primary source comments and follow up where the paper trail leads. Join us where the screen goes dark, the voices stay calm, and the next plotline turns into action. Then watch how a single voice on the net makes darkness visible, and how doctrine learns to bend.